Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Blight here to bring you another deck profile, and today we'll be discussing Infernoids. Now, the Infernoids are a very interesting deck. They're sort of like a mixture between Lightsworn and Dragon Rulers. Well, Dragon Rulers back when they were all at 3. So if you can imagine those two decks combined, that would sort of give you the idea of how Infernoids work. Now, what is specific for the Infernoids is that apart from one of them, none of them can be normal summoned or set. You can only special summon them by banishing a certain amount of Infernoid monsters from your hand or your graveyard. They also don't rely too much on spells and traps because most of their monsters have the effects of most staple spells or traps. So yeah. So without further ado, let's begin. Now this deck profile is going to be a bit different because most of the Infernoids share some summoning conditions and effects, so I'm going to show you multiple monsters at the same time. First up, we're going to start with the Infernoids that have levels 1 through 4. So we have 1 Infernoid Pirmais, which is a level 1 monster, 3 Infernoid Antra, which is a level 2 monster, 2 Infernoid Harmadik, level 3, and 3 Infernoid Patrulea, level 4. Now, all of these monsters that you see here, they can only be special summoned from the hand. So if they're in the graveyard, you cannot special summon them from there. Unlike the higher level Infernoids, which can also be special summoned from the graveyard. All of these require you to banish one Infernoid monster from your hand or graveyard to special summon them from your hand. Now, they all have interesting effects, which is this guy targets one set card on the field and bounces it back into the deck, and your opponent cannot activate the set card on the field. Because I say set card, you can also target set monsters. So it used to be very good against Shaddolls when Shaddolls were a thing. So yeah, but it's still good as an opening move because you can get rid of some back row and your opponent basically cannot respond by using the card you just targeted. So he's sort of like a Night Beam. You don't really need multiples, just one is enough. Most of the time you're going to send this guy with another Infernoid that gains others' effects, so he could copy his effect and do the whole Night Beam thing. This guy, Antra, is a bit more useful against Exceed and Synchro decks. Its effect is you target one face-up card your opponent controls and return it to the hand. So basically this is a compulsory evacuation device. Actually it's better because you can target face-up spells or traps, so it's sort of like Constellar Pleiades, I guess. Although Pleiades can target face-down, so yeah. He's kind of unique. Okay, so this guy has 0 attack and 0 defense. This one has 0 attack and 2000 defense, so you can just put this guy on the field and he can still help protect you until your next turn. This guy has 1600 attack, and his effect is you can target one monster on the field and destroy it. Now this guy used to be like a $30 card, but with the reprint it's sort of like, I don't know, it's like $8 now. That's mostly the reason why I play 2 of these and 3 of these, because this card is like 50 cents and this is like $8 or something. You can also play 3 Harmadik and 2 Antra if you want. You can play around with the ratios as you please. So yeah, if you prefer popping monsters over bouncing face-up cards, then go ahead. And last but not least, we have Infernoid Patrulea, which is a walking, talking MST. You target one spell or trap card on the field and destroy it. Now the thing is, if these guys use their effects, they cannot attack during that turn, so keep that in mind. This guy has 1800 attack points. Now another effect that all of these monsters share is a banishing effect, and that is during your opponent's turn you can tribute one monster. The tributing is the cost, keep in mind, to target one card in your opponent's graveyard and banish it. So it's like having DD Crow all the time. Now this may not be too useful for the current meta, but if you're playing at locals and stuff and you're facing, I don't know, Burning Abyss or Boojins, I guess, it can be very useful to have your very own DD Crow. Now the higher level Infernoids also have this effect, except they can use it also during your turn. But the lower level ones, like these guys, can only use the effect during your opponent's turn. They can also tribute themselves, it doesn't matter. They can tribute another monster or themselves to use the banishing effect. That is it for the lower level Infernoids. Now moving higher up on the level list, we have 3 Infernoid Seitsemas, which is a level 7, and 3 Infernoid Attondel, which is the level 8. Unfortunately, the level 5 and level 6 Infernoids are awful, so they're really not that play. Well, actually, the level 5 isn't that bad, but still stick to these two guys. Okay, so Seitsemas and Attondel require you to banish 2 Infernoid monsters from your hand or your graveyard to special summon them from the hand or the graveyard. See, these guys can be special summoned from the graveyard, which is a lot more useful than the lower level ones. If you could special summon the lower level ones from the graveyard, it would be very useful, trust me. And you're gonna wish you could do that once you start playing Infernoids, but yeah. Okay, so like I said, these guys also have the banishing effect, except they can use it during your turn or your opponent's turn, so yeah. The thing I forgot to mention, and it's very important, when you're using Infernoids, to special summon them, the combined levels and ranks of all effect monsters you control must be 8 or lower. Now what does this mean? That means if I have a Seitsemas, which is a level 7 effect monster on the field, I could special summon another Infernoid monster, any one of them, it doesn't really matter. If I special summon another one, then my total sum of levels and ranks would be 8 or higher, and it would be higher than 8, and then I wouldn't be able to special summon more of them. This may seem complicated, but really it's not. So keep in mind, you have to always mind how many levels and ranks you have on the field, and it only applies for effect monsters. If you have a non-effect monster on the field, you don't have to consider its levels or ranks, which is kind of important once we get to the extra decks. So yeah, like for example, if I have one Attondel on the field, he's level 8, but it still means 8 or lower. So then I could also special summon another Attondel, but I wouldn't be able to special, if I have 2 of them, then I wouldn't be able to special summon anything anymore. I mean, no more Infernoids. I hope that makes sense. It may sound complicated, but it's really not. Once you try it out a few times, it's pretty easy to memorize. Now for their effects, they're pretty powerful. Attondel, if he attacks, and if he destroys a monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, he can attack once again in a row. So this is exactly like BLS. So he can rack up a lot of damage because he has 2,800 attack points. This is their main beat stick and the main facilitator of the OTKs in Infernoids. This guy has a bit less attack, standing at 2,600, which is still decent because it goes over the standard 2,500 norm that most rank 4 monsters have. So his effect is very unique. It is, if he attacks a monster at the end of the battle phase, it doesn't matter if he destroyed the monster or not. It just matters if he attacked and that he remained on the field. You can activate his effect, and that is banish 1 card from the field. Now this effect does not target. So if my opponent had something like El Shaddai Shekinah, which has 3,000 defense, I could still attack with this guy. I would take 400 damage, but then at the end of the battle phase, I can banish Shekinah or any huge monster on the field. I can also banish spells and traps, so you could potentially banish Cosmo Town, the field spell, and not have its effect activate. So Seitsemas is pretty useful, and Attondel, these guys are the main driving force behind the Infernoids. So yeah. And now moving on to the king and queen of Infernoids, the highest level monsters. That is Infernoid Devyaty, which is level 9. And Infernoid Onuncu, which is level 10. Just like Attondel and Seitsemas, you can also special summon these guys from the hand or the graveyard by banishing 3 Infernoid monsters from the hand or the graveyard. So they're required to banish the largest amount of Infernoid monsters, and that is because they have the most powerful effects, especially Devyaty. Her effect is, once she is special summoned, you can destroy all spells and trap cards on the field except void spell cards. Now the void spell and trap cards are specific to the Infernoids, except I don't run them in this deck. They're really not, except for one you'll see later. But they're not really too useful in my opinion, and basically the Infernoid version I'm running is the Lightsworn engine, quick milling one, instead of the void spells and traps setup one. So yeah, basically she is heavy storm once she is special summoned, and this effect alone is devastating because heavy storm is banned. So This card is amazing against all the pendulum decks because it means you can instantly destroy their pendulum scales and their back row. Basically, the only cost you have is to banish 3 Infernoid monsters, which is really not that big if you can get a good mill going. His effect is you can destroy all, once he is special summoned, you can destroy all monsters on the field except him. So it's basically like a dark hole, except he doesn't destroy himself. That is not as useful, but still can be kind of good if you're going for an OTK or going for game. Now, both of them have a specific... They don't have the banishing effect from the graveyard like the other Infernoids, except they have their own unique effect, which requires tributes. Her effect is, when a monster effect is activated, at any time, at any place, during either player's turn, it can be the damage step, whatever. If a monster effect is activated, she can tribute 1 monster to negate the activation and banish that monster. Note that it says banish, not destroy, so that is much more useful than if it would destroy a monster, because there's a lot of monsters these days that cannot be destroyed. So she can also negate Honest during the damage step or something that activates in the graveyard like Cosmo Forerunner or whatever. And his effect is the mirror effect of her, which is when a spell or trap card is activated or a spell trap effect, he can tribute 1 monster, including himself, to negate the activation and banish that spell and trap card. So it's basically if your opponent activates a spell or trap, or if they activate an effect of a spell or trap that's already on the field, such as a field spell, a continuous spell, or a continuous trap. So it can be very deadly. It can also activate it during the damage step and whenever you need it. So, and he can tribute himself. But you don't really want to tribute them unless you absolutely have to. So the basic strategy is to have any Infernoid monster on the field or any normal summonable monster on the field before you summon these guys, because that way you will have 1 monster you can tribute to negate a monster effect or a spell or trap effect. So yeah, basically that's Devyaty and Onuncu, the reigning king and queen of the Infernoids. Now, moving on to the black sheep of the Infernoids, which is Infernoid Decatron. He is the black sheep because this is the only Infernoid you can normal summon, and he's very useful. Before this guy came along, Infernoids were just a clanky deck that mostly relied on luck, but with him it adds a lot more strategy, and he's just amazing. He's a level 1 monster and a tuner. When he's normal or special summoned, you can send 1 Infernoid monster from your deck to the graveyard, and then he gains the level of the send monster, and he gains the effect of the monster. What does this mean? So if it's my turn, and I summon this guy, I can send something like, let's say, Infernoid Pirmais to the graveyard. He's a level 1 monster, so my tuner would now become a level 2 tuner, and I gain his effect. And his effect, like we said, is the Night Beam effect, so I can use that to just bounce one of my opponent's spells or traps or a set monster back into the deck before I attempt to do anything bigger, such as go for a mill or a special summon of a higher level monster. Also, what I like to do with this guy is I like to turn him into an Infernity Barrier of sorts, because if you have a full field going like 2 or 3 Infernoid monsters and you summon this guy, you can send Devyaty or Onuncu and gain their effect. So basically, if you send Devyaty, you can then use this guy to negate a monster effect. So if my opponent has something like Cosmo Farm Girl and they have an Honest in the hand, I have few higher level monsters on the field. My opponent's like, oh, doesn't matter, I have the Honest. Just summon this, send Devyaty, and then you can freely attack, and this guy can negate Honest because he copied Devyaty's effect. You can also do the same thing by sending Onuncu, and then you can negate spells or traps. So very useful. Also, he's a tuner, so that opens up a lot of possibilities if you want to go into synchro monsters, also exceed monsters and stuff, because you can modify its level. He can become level 4, level 2, whatever you need, Decatron can do. So yeah. Also, he's the one because he's level 1, we can special summoning using 1-for-1, so pretty decent. And now for the Lightsworn engine, aka the only monsters you can actually normal summon except Decatron. The Lightsworn engine, in my opinion, doesn't have to be larger than these 3 cards. It works for me, but you can play. You can play with the ratios any way you want. I run 2 Raiden and 1 Lumina Lightsworn Summoner. Basically, Raiden's effect is you can send 2 cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard, and then if you send a Lightsworn monster, he gains 200 attack. But it doesn't really matter if he gains the attack or not, because you get to instantly mill 2 cards, and then during the end phase he mills 2 more cards. As for Lumina, her effect is, you probably know, but you can discard 1 card to target 1 Lightsworn monster in your graveyard, special summon it, and during the end phase she sends 3 cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard. So basically, with him you get to mill 4 cards, and the two of those 4 cards you get to mill immediately and not during the end phase. Of course, it's better to mill them immediately because that can allow you to special summon an Infernoid or do something. While her effect is she mills 3 cards during the end phase, but she can bring back Raiden because he's a Lightsworn monster. So basically you can use her effect to discard any of the higher level Infernoids, meaning it's basically no cost because the higher level Infernoids can be special summoned from the grave. She can bring back Raiden. Raiden would then mill 2 cards, and then during the end phase you get to mill 5 cards, and you get your whole plays going because now you have a lot of cards in the graveyard, and probably during your next turn you can special summon an Infernoid. Also, since they're able to be, since they're Lightsworn, we can search them out with Charge of the Light Brigade, and since we can normal summon them, most of the time we'll be tributing these guys to activate the effects of your Infernoids, such as Devyaty, Onuncu, or the banishing effects of the other Infernoids. And that is it for the monsters. There's a lot of monsters in this deck, which is basically logical because it's a mill deck, so it relies mostly on monsters. Now we're moving on to the spells and traps. I have mentioned void spells and traps before, but this is the only one you need to run, in my opinion. It's called Void Seer. Basically, it's Forbidden Lands on steroids. This effect is target 1 Infernoid monster you control. That target is unaffected by the effects of your opponent's card effects this turn. So basically it's a quick play spell. My opponent activates anything, spell, trap, or monster effect. I target one of my Infernoid monsters and they become unaffected by it until the end of the turn. Which is just amazing because with this you can pretty much guarantee that Devyaty is going to get her Heavy Storm effect or that Onuncu is going to get his Dark Hole effect. Now this card's usefulness doesn't end there because it has a secondary effect. If this card is in the graveyard and one of your Infernoid monsters would be destroyed by a card effect, you can banish this card from the graveyard instead of destroying one of those monsters. Now this effect does not start a chain, it's very specific. The easiest way to explain this effect would be okay, I'm just gonna get my extra deck for a second so I can explain how this would work. Imagine if I had a rank 4, if I had Silent Honor Arc, and my opponent activates a Dark Hole. Silent Honor Arc would not start a chain, but he can instead just detach 1 Exceed material to protect himself from destruction. The same thing is with Void Seer. If your opponent activates something like Dark Hole, or even during the damage step, if you had a Raikou or something and your monster would be destroyed by a card effect, you just banish this instead of destroying one of those monsters. So it's sort of like an instead effect. So it doesn't start a chain and it's very useful. Most of the time your opponent just forgets this card is in your graveyard, so they're going to use something like Dark Hole or try to destroy your monsters, and then you're just like, no, I'm just going to banish this instead of destroying one of them. Also, if you have this in the graveyard and you use Onuncu's effect, you can protect the other Infernoid monster you would have on the field so that Onuncu doesn't destroy them. So yeah, that is Void Seer, a very useful card. I run a 2, you can also run 3 if you want, but I find 2 to be the perfect number. Now the god card of the deck, Reasoning. This is the card you're gonna pray to see on your first turn because it lets you mill your entire deck with some luck. Now, Reasoning works like this. Your opponent declares a level, and then you excavate cards from the top of your deck until you come across a monster that can be normal summoned. If that monster is the level your opponent declared, it is sent to the graveyard. If not, it's special summoned to your field, to your side of the field. Regardless of that, all the other cards you excavate are sent to the graveyard. So basically, how does this work? I'm just gonna demonstrate an example. Hold on, let me just grab some cards. My opponent declares level 1, knowing that I have Infernoid Decatron. I'm revealing cards from the top of my deck. I reveal, oh, this cannot be normal summoned, so this goes to the grave. This cannot be normal summoned, or this, or this, or this, or this. Oh wait, this can be normal summoned, but it's level 4, so my opponent did not guess the level, so I get a free Raiden, and all of these other guys go into the graveyard where I can then use them for special summons or whatnot. So yeah, that is reasoning in a nutshell. With some luck, this can help you set up for the entire duel if you draw it on your first turn. But there's also going to be times when your opponent will guess correctly, and something like, they say level 4, you reveal one card and it's Raiden and it gets sent to the graveyard, and that sucks, but that is luck. So yeah, reasoning, we also run one Monster Gate. Monster Gate is very similar to reasoning, except it's kind of better in a way. You tribute one monster, and then you reveal cards from the top of your deck until you come across a monster that can be normal summon, and then you special summon it. So basically it's reasoning, but without guessing the level. The difference being that you need to have a monster to tribute. So yeah. Next up we have Charge of the Light Brigade, which sends 3 cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard as the cost. Note it's the cost, so if you activate this, 3 cards immediately get sent to the graveyard without your opponent being able to respond to that mill. They can respond to the spell card, but the cost will already be paid. So with this, you at least get to mill 3 cards. Why do you mill 3 cards? Because then you get to search out a level 4 or lower Lightsworn monster, which is Raiden or Lumina. So this is a card you really want to have on your first turn also. Next up we have 1-for-1. It can bring out Decatron, and basically since it requires you to discard a monster, you just discard one of your higher level Infernoids, so basically it's no cost at all. Burial from a Different Dimension. You get to return up to 3 banished monsters back to the graveyard. With this you can refill your graveyard, and that would allow you to special summon one of your Infernoid monsters such as Devyaty or Onuncu or anything that requires more than one banish. It's a great card. It's limited to 1. If it wasn't, we'd be playing 3 copies, but yeah. And next up we have Galaxy Cyclone, which is an amazing card. It's sort of like MST, but it's specific for mill decks. You target one set spell or trap card on the field, destroy it, and it's a spell card. It's not a quick play spell card, but if it's in the graveyard, except the turn it was sent there, you can banish it to target one face-up spell and trap card and destroy it. So basically, if you draw this, you can use it basically as an MST. If you mill it, you can still use the secondary effect. It's amazing. I would run 2, but it's an expensive card, and so far I only have 1. So my substitute for the other one is Malevolent Catastrophe. If my opponent's monster declares an attack, you destroy all spells and traps on the field. It's nowhere near as useful as Galaxy Cyclone, but it'll have to do until I get the second Galaxy Cyclone. And last but not least, we have 2 breakthrough skills. This is effect negation. Basically, you target one of your opponent's monsters and negate its effect until the end phase. And if it's in the graveyard during your turn, you can banish it to target one effect monster your opponent controls and negate its effects until the end phase. Basically, this is what I side out most of the time. If your opponent doesn't really use too many monster effects, then you don't need this. But mostly it's nice to have some effect negation, and if it gets milled you still have the effect, so it doesn't really matter. And last but not least, we have Torrential Tribute, the best trap card of all time. When a monster is normal or special summoned, destroy all monsters on the field. Can help you clear the field, go for the OTKs, whatnot. It doesn't have any effect from the graveyard, but it's still nice when you draw it. So, and now we're moving on to the extra deck. Basically for this deck you only need 3 or 4 monsters in the extra deck, because you almost never go into the extra deck apart from these monsters. And these spectacular monsters are Gaia, Knight, the Force of Earth, Scrap Archfiend, and the Mighty Gem Knight Pearl. These guys have amazing monster effects. Oh, I'm just kidding. They don't have any monster effects. Note that I remember how I said that Infernoid monsters can only be special summoned if the total sum of ranks and levels is 8 or lower. But that only applies to effect monsters. Since these guys are non-effect monsters, you don't care about their levels or ranks. So basically, Raiden is a tuner, I forgot to mention. So if I have Raiden, and I have something like, I don't know, let's see, Patrulea or Decatron, not Decatron, Harmadik. Harmadik is a level 3 monster and Patrulea is the level 4. I can then go into Synchro Summon Scrap Archfiend, which is a level 7 monster, has 2700 attack. And then basically I can proceed to special summon 2 more Infernoids such as Seitsemas Attondel or Seitsemas Attondel and one of the higher level ones, Devyaty or Onuncu, and go for the OTK. Gemini Pearl is the same. If I have 2 level 4 monsters, I can exceed into this guy. Except I don't like going into Gemini Pearl because he cannot detach his exceed materials. So if I made him using an Infernoid monster, that would mean the Infernoid monster is stuck underneath Gemini Pearl as an exceed material, and thus I'm unable to banish it for the cost of special summoning a monster from the graveyard. So yeah, Gaia Knight, the Force of Earth, is almost the same, except he's level 6 and has 2600 attack. Decatron is the other tuner, and he can adjust his levels by sending appropriate Infernoid monsters, so he can easily become level 2 or level 3 or level 4, which can help you go into these guys. So these are used for the OTKs. If you're playing against Infernoids and you see one of these, you can get ready for an OTK. And then we have some more monsters in the extra deck, but they're basically just filler stuff. You can put anything you like, it doesn't really matter. You have Silent Honor Arc, Gaga Cowboy, which I've never used in this deck, but you know, what the hell not? Why the hell not? Abyss Dweller, and then you have some rank 8 such as Felgrand, and let's see, level 10 Synchro Leo. This is useful against Burning Abyss because he cannot be targeted easily. Star Eater, Stardust Spark Dragon. Now there is a level 8 Synchro monster which is very useful in Infernoids, and I have to mention it. It's a relatively newer card, and it's called PSY-Framelord Omega. A generic rank 8, generic level 8 Synchro monster, 2800 attack. It has the following effects. During your opponent's standby phase, you can return one banished monster you can return one banished monster to the graveyard. So this is very useful for the Infernoids because you can just return one of your banished Infernoids and reuse it later on. His second effect is during either player's main phase, you can banish him along with one card from your opponent's hand until your next standby phase. This is extremely annoying. You get to see basically one card from your opponent's hand, and he can't use it until his next turn if you let him. I mean, you can still use the effect on his next main phase. And his last effect is if PSY-Framelord Omega is in the graveyard, you can shuffle him back into the extra deck, and then you can use the Transmigration Prophecy effect, which is basically you shuffle one card from either a graveyard back into the deck. Now, I don't have this card because it's relatively new and it's really expensive, something around $40. I still haven't gotten it, but it's an amazing monster to use in Infernoids, and if you have it, definitely use it. So it's PSY-Framelord Omega. All of these other cards are just fillers, you're never going to use these, but it's nice to have options. So basically, as far as the extra deck is concerned, all you need is these 3 guys and PSY-Framelord Omega. That is it for the Infernoid deck profile. It's a very specific deck, and it can take some time to get used to it because of all the combos and the rulings and stuff. But once you get the hang of it, it's very fun because each duel is unique. You never know what you're going to mill. You never know which monsters you're going to summon. So it's not like those autopilot decks where you do the same thing all over again. Which is what makes Infernoids interesting because they can counter a lot of decks, including the current meta decks such as Magispector or Cosmo. If you have Heavy Storm, which you can easily activate, then you know the deck is powerful. You also have a lot of banishing effects, negations, whatever you need Infernoids can do, but they're limited to having at most 2 monsters on the field. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this deck profile. Stay tuned for more stuff, and see you guys later. Bye bye.